This past week I heard part of an interview with the Oklahoma City Thunder general manager, in which he stated that the latter part of the season they were trying not to win. You think about it, I thought when teams were out to win. And the reason they didn't was because if by not winning, they have a chance of getting a higher draft pick. And they want the higher draft pick because it'll help them in the years ahead. And so what happens then, so with that in mind, they started calling up a lot of players from the D-League and giving them 10-day contracts so that they could evaluate future talent. And so when these young players would come up, how much would they give? They'd give 100% because this is my only chance. And so what happened is they won some games they weren't supposed to win because they had people giving 100%. And of course those players are saying what? If the Thunder don't want me, I want to do my best so somebody else can see me and maybe they'll want me. And so it's interesting when you look at the part with the Oklahoma City Thunder, but with all of us. What's our vision? And I think it's interesting, we've had and what's my role in the vision? We covered that. We had a vision team that covered that. And what are some of the problems? But today my main emphasis is going to be is what's the problems that affect the vision here at Dalton Hill and effect on the team. So kind of the problems that affect the team and its vision. And you have a lot of them. And so just to remind you, I was even asked this morning by, one that says, what is our vision? Where are you guys at on our vision? So I thought, we've already had covered that, but we'll do it. And so, Gene, if you'll just pick that up and show it to them. This obviously is kind of what we have. This came out of the Margaret Reddy's class. If you notice what it is, basically, it was the purpose to restore and to rescue and to return. And so when you think about it, Dalton Hill, historically, as the vision team looked at it, what has Dalton Hill done for the last 25 years? And basically was that of a vision of rescuing. A lot of people were hurt by other churches and was then to rescue and to basically put them. So one is we are to rescue people who are enslaved to Satan and to bring them to Jesus Christ. Another one is that we are to rescue believers who have been wounded, get them off the battlefield, and to help them mend. And then obviously the third one is then to take the mended ones and put them back into service. But like I was watching this past week when we were looking at it, I enjoy watching some of the shows, and they were showing, this is up north, where they were showing some of the raptor type birds and how they'd been hurt. And they then mend them and put them back into the wild. But as soon as they're mended, do they put them straight into the wild? No. They have to reintroduce slowly in larger containments until they know that they're safe. If they put them right away, they themselves will die. So that's therefore, we want to think about that and look at what our part is of the rescue facility. And as such, if you're a rescue facility, you'll never be real large. We're not going to be First Baptist Owasso, nor will First Baptist Owasso be Dalton Hill. They do great work up there. They really do. But like I said, we're not trying to be them, but we were trying to be a facility that will rescue and then turn people back in and help them. So that's kind of where it's at. So if we need a question we can ask them, do I embrace the vision of Dalton Hill? And what happens so often when it comes to the teams, I just told you about, how often are the players embracing the vision of the team? Give you an example. At my house, Gene and I had it built 20-some years ago. And I have, since I like plants, and Gene does, we've got plants all around the house. All four sides got it. Well, all of them have done well except for one place in the front of our house. The most important place. And I put out, and I love azaleas, so I put out Korver azaleas, which is my favorite. Not quite as hardy for here, but so they did well for a while. And then we had a cold spell and they died back. So I gave them a good haircut. Took them a year. They came back. 2 years ago, what do you think happened to them? That really bad one. They all died. Well, I cut them way, way back. Only 4 made it, and they looked terrible. Gene wanted them out a while back, but I kept trying to say, they'll make it, they'll make it. Well, so I decided, well, I need to replace them, and I'll go with finally Jerry. They're a more hardy plant. And so I got the stuff that I needed. I thought, well, let's just take a couple hours. So yesterday I thought, well, I have everything done. I'm going to work on my plants. I go out there and start digging, and all of a sudden the first hole, concrete. I go down a foot, hit concrete. So I get my sledge out and have to break all this concrete up. Every single hole. So what happened is, on that side of the house, when they poured the slab, any excess concrete, what did they do? They pulled it up. It was 6 feet out from the foundation. And where the azaleas did the worst on the east side, it was only 4 inches below the surface. So what does that act? It acts like a dam. When it gets cold in the winter, what's going to happen to the water?
Freeze.
So this little couple-hour project took a little longer. And so I was trying to take concrete and break it up. It's anywhere from 2 to 4 inches thick, all the way across. Breaking holes and getting the hole all the way around. Did the concrete people have a vision for the next guy?
No.
Did they get their job done? Well, when the guy comes in and does the dirt work, what did he do?
Covered it up.
He sloped it from the house away from the house, covered it up. So a landscaper, when they come in, and they just do what? Small bushes, dig little holes and set them there. Do they care about it? Nope. Each one of them did their job, but were they part of an entire team to do it right? And easily, you and I can do the same thing. We can have our little part, but do we see the effect of other people and what it can have? So I want us to think about that. Just some of the problems that affect the team and its vision. I'm going to take at least 2 weeks to do it, and then we're going to get on to some other things. And what we're doing is we're trying to come up with all the different areas which people can serve at the church. And each person is going to be important. We're having it where everybody can serve. So one of them, let's look at Mark chapter 10. The first problem that can affect the team, Mark chapter 10, and is that of role. What role do we have? In Mark 10, in verse 35 down to 45, we know the story well. There's the apostles come, and in verse 35, James and John, this is Mark 10, verse 35, James and John, the two sons of Zebedee, came to him and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And he said, What do you want from me? And notice in 37, grant that we may sit in your glory, one on the right and one on the left. That's a way to build a good team spirit. Right? Hey, we want the prominent positions. And notice then, it's interesting what happens in verse 41. In hearing this, the 10 became very indignant. Why were they indignant?
They thought they had
They
overstepped
thought they
their
were
bounds.
better than the other guy.
Well, or do you think any of them thought, man, why didn't I ask the question? How many of them wanted it? But by the way, who were they thinking of? A team or themselves? And so notice that they're supposed to be a team, but they're thinking of themselves. And notice that's why Jesus then talks about whoever wants to be the greatest. Notice in verse 35, starting in 42 down to 45. And calling them to himself, notice he's speaking to all of them. You know that those who are recognized as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. And that's what you have in most places that we're at today. But if any among you want to be, whoever wishes to be great among you shall be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you shall be a slave to all. And then the key verse for the book of Mark, for even the Son of Man did not come to serve, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. Notice then you'll have to do what? Is it going to be team or is it going to be self? And that really has an amazing impact on any team. You'll rarely find the team with the most talent wins. It's the team that works as a team that wins. They try to do it all the time. They go out and spend all this money to get all these players, but what happens is you see it. You have the ones there kind of prima donnas, and what happens at the end of the game. When the game's on the line, who wants the ball? You got 3 or 4 of them that want the ball, and they don't work as a team, and consequently it doesn't work well. But notice that in the role, one is that is it team or is it self? Another part of the role is in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, and we've looked at this also, 1 Corinthians chapter 3. You notice in verse 5 and 6, they had a lot of divisions in the Corinthian church. 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 5, what then is Apollos and what is Paul? Servants through whom you believed, even as the Lord gave an opportunity to each. Notice, I planted, Apollos watered, but God was causing the growth. Second thing on part of a role is not just team versus self, but it's a role on the team. What role do you have on the team? And you have the same thing when you get to 1 Corinthians 12. You remember we are here, if you can turn over there for a moment, 1 Corinthians, since you're just a couple pages over. 1 Corinthians 12, notice what it says in verse 7. To each one, all believers, is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. We all have a spiritual gift. It's for the common good. We're a team. We're a team at the body. And then notice he then goes down to verse 14. The body is not a one member but many. As the foot should say, because I'm not the hand, I don't need you. How many of us, we need all of us. A lot of you, I noticed, you have been in pain and different things. You know, you just think of Merrill, and it's different. You have a problem with your foot, does it cause you later to have a problem with your knee? Does it then cause you to have a problem with your hip? Does it cause you to have a problem with your back? Because you're overcompensating. And so what happens, we need all parts to be working correctly, or else it affects parts that weren't. And it's amazing how often that happens. So when you think about it, just the first problem, do I know my role? And am I doing it? Do I recognize others and allow them to do it? Because are they going to do it different than you? Okay? You can see that in anything. You get budget, you get in anything. If a person has the gift of mercy, will they have a tendency to want to give the money away a little quicker? They see a lot of needs and they're wanting to what? And then you have somebody else that may be a gift of administration and you have a lot. So we all have a role to play. It's important. So I think about it, it's like in the outdoor beds at my house. Would it have been nice if everybody saw the whole picture? And how hard would it have been for them to clean the concrete up while it was wet and got rid of it, instead of having to try to deal with it now? And now you just hope that you got big enough holes for the water to drain. I guess time will tell. It reminded me, I used to play a lot of basketball, and we were playing at a church, and there's a number of players that were playing, so they decided they wanted to form a league. So the 4 best players in the league basically became captains, and they then went around from the least to the best of the 4 to the best, and they each picked players until everybody that was playing in the league was on a team, trying to make it fair. And I'll never forget Steve Pollard, who played in college. In fact, most of the guys played in college, and went and picked a player. His first player he picked didn't even average 2 points a game. Why would you pick somebody who doesn't even score 2 points a game as your first pick? I asked him, one, that player covered Steve better than anybody else in the league. He didn't want him covering him. He said because that player plays defense, he rebounds, and he knows his place on the team. And he said whenever he's on my team, he sets great picks for me so I can get open and I can shoot, and I'm the best shooter in the league. And he was. As soon as he crossed half court, you better cover him. But what happened? Did that player know his role? And their team ended up winning the league. So I think it's interesting. Do we know our role? And a lot of us, we don't. That's part of why I never forget when I was in high school and all the way through school. Why do I have to take this class? Why do I have to take this class? I don't like it. Well, you know what it did? It showed me what I was good at and also showed me what I wasn't good at and what I should go after when I got finished with school and what I should not go after. I think it's important. So if we want a problem affecting team, is what role do we have and what role does somebody else have? Leave the second thing, look over into 3 John. So we need to know our role. In 3 John, John is writing to Gaius. You see that in verse 1. And notice the past about Gaius. Apparently he had some health issues in verse 2. And then notice in verse 3, I was very glad when brethren came and bore witness to your truth, that is, how you are walking in truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in truth. Gaius in the past was doing great. Notice in verse 5, behold, you're acting faithfully whenever accomplished of the brethren, especially when they're strangers. So he's using his means to help believers, and when traveling ministers come through, he is helping them. And they bear witness, as notice in verse 6, that you're loved before the church, and you'll do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy. So here he is, he's helping people out. They're coming through, and he's helping them. And then notice that what they're present. For they went out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore we ought to support such men, that we may be fellow workers with the truth. And this is what Gaius has been doing. Notice the problem is that you have somebody else comes in the midst in verse 3. I wrote something to the church. Notice I'll call him Di, because I probably can't pronounce it. But Di loves to be first among them and doesn't accept what we say. For this reason, if I come, I'll call attention to his deeds, which he does, unjustly accusing us with wicked words. Not satisfied with this, neither does he himself receive the brethren. And if he forbids those who desire to do so, he puts them out of the church. So here Gaius is part of this, and people were coming, and he was supporting him, and he was helping them. And you'll notice Demetrius is coming in verse 12. But all of a sudden, anybody who tries to help things or do things, we have a dictator. And what does the dictator do? It's my way or the highway, and he kicks them out. And if you are trying to help somebody, so guys, you've been doing this in the past, and now you have a problem in your church, in the church, and when this new one comes, Demetrius is coming, are you going to do what you did in the past and help him, knowing that who's going to be against you? Di's going to be against you. He may even kick you out of the church. But what are you going to do? And I think it's interesting. Dictatorships, does that ever have effect on the team? When people say my way or the highway. It really does. It has a lot. And I think what happens is we so often will cower them. Whatever that person says, we do, and we often don't do what we ought to be doing. I'll never forget, Gene and I had been a member of a church years and years ago, and we loved the pastor, and he was felt called, went to another church, so the church called another individual to come, and when he came, he dictated. In fact, while we were there, he went through, a large church, went through entire church staff twice. It was his way or the highway. And even those who were just simply members, weren't even part of the staff, if they didn't do what he wanted, he would kick them out of the church. And he was very, very dictatorial. And so what happens is how well, basically, you had to find out what he wanted, and if you either did it his way or you weren't there. And that has a tremendous impact then on the team. How well do you serve? How well do you use your gifts? Because you never know, when you're going to get, people are going to get onto you. So think about it. We had the problem that affects the team, obviously, is our role. Do I support the entire team? And then what role do I have within it? Second one is this, what kind of leadership we have. Is it a dictatorship or what is it? Third one I think that we have a lot of, and it happens everywhere we go, is look over in Philippians chapter 4. I'm just glad I didn't live during this time because my name might be in Scripture for everyone to see. Look over in verse 2. I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to live in harmony in the Lord. Personality conflict. Notice in verse 3, that's the problem. Notice in verse 3, indeed, true comrade, how'd you like to be the true comrade? I ask you also to help these women who have shared my struggle in the cause of the gospel. So have these two women served the Lord in the past?
Yes.
They have. Together with Clement also, the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. Notice it's not doctrine, or Paul would have addressed the doctrine. They have a personality conflict, and notice it's sidelined who? Both of them. Do we ever have personality conflicts in a church? And you basically, well, what happens is, it's the tendency for all of it, if you have a personality conflict, and there's a couple of you, what happens is, how many of us want to get people on our side? How many of them want to get on their side? So then you have this division that's going on, and one person's siding with you, and if you don't side with me, then you're what? Then you're against me. And we have these personality conflicts. It's interesting. They need a mediator. How would you like it if somebody comes in to be the mediator between you and somebody else? Personality conflicts, it's amazing how many. And you watch in sports, how many times personality conflicts on a team totally disrupt teams. And it can happen a lot. It's interesting though, have I dropped off to the team due to a conflict? I'll never forget, I had the privilege of marrying, there was 4 siblings, and I had the privilege of marrying 3 of them at different times. And the last time I was asked to do it, I went to the rehearsal and the wedding. Well, in the meantime, 2 of the spouses had a conflict that I had married in the past. They no longer were speaking. So you go to the rehearsal dinner, and then here their in-laws, one's sitting on this side of the room, one's on this side of the room. So the rehearsal dinner, they don't talk. You get them up front, they stand there, and then back apart. And then after the wedding, instead of having the wedding party where you normally would, you'd have the wedding party, but this couple was at this table, and this couple was over at this table. Most didn't recognize it, but anybody that had been around could definitely see, and that's not how it should be. But notice, neither side was going to give an inch. And it's affecting, and it affected the whole family. And parents were embarrassed, and they wished things would change, and some of the siblings would. But until those 2 get it worked out, it has a tremendous impact on the team and the vision. And the family is suffering greatly for it. And there's offspring and little kids, and the kids play together, but what happens when the parents? They used to play together, now they don't get to see each other. So think about it, personality conflicts. It's interesting when you look in Proverbs 25, it talks about 27, you don't have to go there. It says, it's not good to eat too much honey, nor is it glory to search out one's own glory. And how many times do we do that? Personality conflicts. And I've seen it, I don't know how many times with interviews, people get upset if they're not the main person or whatever it might be. The purpose is to what? Is to win a ball game. Purpose is to restore. And if I'm behind the scenes, so be it. If you're up front, okay. But we need all of them. And so think about it. Here you have what role do I have as a team, or what role on the team? The dictatorship. It's not just my way or the highway. I've seen that with my 3 kids. Now, I like the yard. I like yard work. I like doing plants. They're not really plant people. Okay. Is it their yard? Yeah. If they want to spend their time doing other things, it's their choice. When they ask for help, I'll give it to them, but it's their choice. And they do ask, and so tomorrow I'll be helping one of them. You know? But again, that's their choice. What they want, where they have it, it's their team, it's their group. If I want to be part of their team, I have to work according to what they like. And so I think it's important. I think another one that you have, what about changing of the guard? What happens when different positions change? You have it in the book of Acts. It's interesting. In Acts chapter 11, we'll look there, and it's kind of interesting. Between Acts 11 and Acts 15 and 16, you have quite a change. If you remember the book of Acts, you had the first part, you have the Jews, then you have the Samaritans, and then you have the Gentiles. And you have Paul's conversion in Acts 9, and then basically his training. And then notice when you get to chapter 11 of Acts, and what happens in chapter 11, church at Antioch, Gentile church, had great things going on. And notice in verse 22, news about them reached the ears of the church at Jerusalem. They sent Barnabas off to Antioch. Then he went and came and witnessed the grace of God. He rejoiced and began encouraging them, all with resolved hearts to remain true to the Lord. For he was a good man and full of the Holy Spirit and faith, and a considerable number were brought to the Lord. Notice in verse 25, he left for Tarsus and looked for Paul. So Paul now joins up with Barnabas, and you'll notice in verse 30, it says, and this they did, sending it in charge of Barnabas and Saul to the elders. You get into chapter 13, the Holy Spirit calls them on the first missionary journey. It's interesting, in verse 2 of chapter 13, when they're ministering to the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work that I have before them. And you go on until you get to chapter 15, it's Barnabas and Paul. What happens when you get to chapter 16? Well, they have the split, but now before they have the split, it now switches to become Paul and Barnabas. Paul becomes the natural leader. Barnabas' ministry is out of encouragement, so he went off to encourage John Mark, and John Mark later was good for ministry. But what happens when there's a change of the guard? How well do we accept the change of the guard? I'll never forget, I had a guy work for me for a while, and he was at the church where Gene and I were at, the pastor that we really liked, and he had left. And this one served under him. And he and I were having a talk when the new pastor came in. He said, well, yeah, the first time I met with him, now you remember, you're on church staff. New pastor comes in. He said, yeah, the first time I met him, I said, yeah, you'll never be my pastor. Well, how well does that to change? If the Holy Spirit leads one person off, and the Holy Spirit leads another one in, and the church calls him, shouldn't we be working with that change? Needless to say, he wasn't at the church on a overly long time. But how well do we do the changing of the guard? We like the one, and we don't like the change, and that's going to be in anything. We have certain teachers, certain personalities, certain students that we like. Those students graduate, we have a new class come in. And how easy is it to compare this class to the last one? Especially if the last one was good and this one's not. I know Shelley's grinning back there. There's a lot of that. It can happen. So I think about it, how do we accept the change of the guard? The older we get, how many of you find it very hard to accept change? It would just happen this week. They're constantly changing stuff for the refinery, especially with IT. Every time you turn around, there's something new. In a new way you have to do some program or something. This is supposed to make it easier. And I had one of them this week, different one. I don't know why they keep doing this. It's not making it easier. It's just making it harder. But that's the world we live in. Change is happening. But does it affect the team? One wants to change, one doesn't want to change, and it affects the team. So notice we had a role that we have. That's one thing that affected. Team versus self. What role do I play? dictatorship, one person wanting to run everything. You have the personality conflicts. Any length of time, there will be a personality conflict. How do I handle it? Changing of the guard is another one. Let's look at the fifth one, just the last one for today. Look over in Galatians chapter 2. Notice in verse 11, and when Cephas came to Antioch, Cephas and Peter, depending on whether he's dealing with Jews or whether he's dealing with Gentiles, but I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. This is Paul speaking. For prior to coming down certain men from James, he used to eat with Gentiles, talking about Peter, but when they came, he became withdrawn and hold himself aloof, fearing the party of the circumcision. The rest of the Jews joined him in the hypocrisy, with the result that even Barnabas was carried away by the hypocrisy. When I saw this, that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas in the presence of all, you being a Jew, live like Gentiles and not like Jews. How is it that you are compelling the Gentiles to live like Jews? Partiality. Partiality have any problem in leading to teamwork? When I coached basketball, I'll never forget, it happened a couple of times. We had a couple girls, they were the best of friends and the worst of enemies. And it depended upon what day it was. You just never knew. And I remember during one game, a girl was wide open under the basket twice, and the teammate didn't pass it to her. And at halftime, I said, why didn't you pass it to her? She was wide open. I'm mad at her. Okay, but what's our purpose? What's our vision? We're trying to win a basketball game and put those things aside. But it's amazing, but partiality is really plays a lot. I'll never forget being on part of a search committee one time that we were looking for a facility. And so we found that we didn't have much money. We found a facility, but it was in the heart of a neighborhood. And most people will tell you what, a church in the heart of a neighborhood you don't want, most people would say, for what reason? No visibility. You are really hard to find and different things. Well, when I was visiting with one who was kind of one of the leaders on the committee, so, well, we don't want it, and they mentioned that. We said, well, this is in an undesirable neighborhood. In fact, I've been on 2 places where they've done that. The sad part is I lived in the same kind of neighborhood. Makes you feel really good when you're part of the undesirable neighborhood. And we're wanting to leave your undesirable neighborhood. He said also a lot of minorities are moving in here and we don't want to be part of that. That's showing partiality. And that has a tremendous impact. Do they need Christ? We're here to restore. That's all denominations and all groups. So I think it's important to recognize if you're a paramedic, how many of you are glad when you call the paramedic when they come, did they first say, oh, wrong gender, oh, wrong race? When the paramedic comes, he comes to do what? To help any and every one. And if we're going to be a paramedic for Jesus Christ, we have to do the same thing. So I think about it, those are the 4 that we have, the 5 that we talked about today, the problems that affect our vision. Is it teamwork itself, and then what role do I have on the team? And some of that will take time. It didn't take me long when I played basketball to realize that I'm not a scorer. And when the game's on the line, you don't want me to end up with the ball. Because if you do, we're going to lose. I did not have a good shot. Or didn't have, I'm sure I don't now. Second thing, what about dictatorship? A dictatorship, if it's just one person running, and what happens so often, we go to churches for the same reason. People go to church because of that one person. And when that person leaves, God calls them another church, what happens to the church? So often it falls apart because it's all centered around one individual. We want to be working as a team, irregardless of whether it's 1 or 2, whatever it might be. We have a team to work with. I think it's interesting, but again, what about personality conflicts? If I'm having a personality conflict, the quicker we get it resolved, the better, because it's affecting everyone. How many times do you think you can cover it up? How well do we hide our feelings? Gene used to tell me when I would pull up to the house, the kids could see how I got out of the truck as to what kind of mood I was in before I ever got in it. I hadn't said a word, they already knew what kind of mood I was in. People who know you can recognize it, and it's best that we address it. What about changing of the guard? Are all things going to stay the same? No. And then how are we going to work with the change when it happens, whatever those changes are? And then partiality, one of the quickest ways to cut off unity is show partiality. People will see it real quick. And it's amazing, kids will really pick up on it. Very, very quick. Very, very quick. Very, very quick. Very, very quick. Very, very